Hi, this is Real Talk with Al. I'm Al Reynolds, Project Director for Neighborhood Initiatives at Literacy, Inc. Link provides literary support to children and families while making learning fun. Link is also part of the REACH initiative, where 10 literacy organizations support children from birth to 5th grade, helping them achieve in school. Real Talk with Al is all about the 2020 census. Today with me, I am so happy to introduce Melva Miller, who is the Executive Vice President at the Association for Better New York, also known as APNY. She leads the organization Census 2020 initiative to get an accurate count for New York. She also works with community-based organizations like Link to help promote the importance of being counted. Welcome, Melva.
Thank you, Al. Happy to be here.
I am so glad that you are. So, first question, tell me about APNY and its work for the 2020 census.
Sure. So first, I just want to say I'm really honored and happy to be on Real Talk with Al. Any opportunity I have to talk real authentically and genuinely around the census and what it means for community, I'm all for it. So thank you for allowing me to be your guest this week. But the Association for a Better New York, as you so accurately defined, better known as APNY, is an organization that started in the 70s. And it was around the time of the fiscal crisis where New York City was looking at bankruptcy and, not too differently from today's times when the budget is in crisis and there's disinvestment happening in the city for a number of different reasons. Members of New York City's real estate community and other leaders got together and said they wanted to do their part. So, they did a number of initiatives for the betterment of New York, like they prepaid their property taxes, right? And these were some of the largest real estate developers in New York City. So having that money in the bank for the city was a huge opportunity to prevent further loss and further budget cuts. So over the time, the association has been doing a number of civic opportunities and projects. And early in 2018, APNY identified the 2020 census as their next priority, not only for the organization, but also for the city of New York. So what they did was they hired me, and we worked on a work plan that really put APNY in a place where we are here to supplement and support the census stakeholders on the ground doing the work. So we want to make sure that we are giving the community-based organizations, the federal government, the state government, city government, the private sector, the resources that we all need to do a really robust outreach effort for the 2020 census. As we know, the census means billions of dollars for programs that affect our lives every day. It also means congressional representation, whether or not, you believe in we need more politicians or less politicians, having folks in Washington fighting for what we believe in is extremely important, especially in today's time. And we all know that our congressional representation also represents our electoral college votes, which are extremely important during presidential elections. And we can't afford to lose any of those federal dollars or any of that federal representation. So the census, really affects our lives in so many different ways. And it is truly the number one public investment in our communities, and we have to make sure that we get the data so that we get the funding and we get the representation in Congress.
Yeah, I mean, your organization is one of the leaders working on this effort, and I personally want to say thank you.
Thank you, Al.
So I want to ask you, what services are determined by the census count?
Absolutely. So, the decennial census, which is the census that happens every 10 years, according to the Constitution, says that every whole person living in this country at the time of the census is to be enumerated, is to be accounted. And the reason why that is the government needs to understand how to distribute a fair share of government resources based on who lives here, right? The more people you have, the more money that state gets, right? So, there's programs, it's about there are programs, $675 billion annually that gets distributed based on this data, this population data purely. And the programs range from, medical assistance program like Medicaid. It funds the supplemental nutrition and assistance program, SNAP. It funds the free breakfast and lunch programs. It funds tuition for higher education programs. It funds community health centers, right? When we're talking about COVID-19, we talk about the lack of resources in our communities. That funding comes from census data funding. And it's so important that we have this money so that we can get these services, because there's a finite number of money and it's proportionate. So if we don't get it, someone else does. So when we look at, a community that is responding only 50%, that means 50% of resources for school lunch programs, for, educational programs, for job training programs, when you have 100% of residents living in the community, which means somebody's going to get shortchanged, right? So we need to make sure that we get our fair share, because there are about 55 top programs that get funded. According to the 2016 data, New York State alone received $74 billion from census-related data. So that's how much annually, right? So that's how much New York State gets annually based on the census data. And what happens at the decennial census year continues for the next 10 years. So we want to make sure that whatever number we get, it's a good number, because we're stuck with that for the next decade.
Wow, this really is the big effect on our lives of our children and our families. This is major. And I want people to know how important it is to be counted. So, Melva, I'm sure you've heard about Trump's executive order attempt not to count undocumented people. What are your feelings about this?
So, it's really unfortunate that this has come up again. As many people know, especially those in the census world, have been fighting for this since 2018, when the Trump administration tried to add a question on the census form about citizenship. Right. So we know that tactic was used because it came out in the news and records. It was a form of intimidation, right, to deter people who are afraid of their immigration or their citizenship status to be known to the government and would not complete the census form, so that we don't get the resources in our communities. Right. But that issue went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled on it and said that the way the question was added to the form was illegal. So the administration would have had to go back to the drawing board and start their case all over again and come through the process, because the issue is not about the legality of the question, because there is a question on the American Community Survey, which is the census that happens every year, where the Census Bureau surveys 2.7% of the population, which is the long form. There is a question on there about citizenship. But whenever a question is added to a census form, it has to go through a vetting process, right? Because this is something in the Constitution that says everyone in the United States is to respond, and they want maximum participation. So if there's anything that serves as an obstacle for participation, they need to study that. So the issue with this citizenship question on the 2020 census was the way the Census Bureau, the Department of Commerce, tried to add that question was illegal. And they had to go through the process, which is about a 3-year vetting process, and they didn't have time. This most recent stunt by the federal administration to say by executive order or memorandum that anyone who is undocumented is not to be counted in the apportionment process is a scare tactic for a number of reasons. So one, on the surface, just saying that would make people think if they complete the census form, right, then they will be outed.
Right.
The real of it is there's no way for them to know who is documented or who isn't from the census form, because there is no question asking that, right? So
Right.
there's no way for the federal administration to look at a response from a household and say, based on the census form, someone is documented or undocumented. The second issue with that is that information, individual household information, is protected by law by Title 13 for 72 years, meaning no person, no agency has the availability to look at that record and use it for any purpose other than what the Census Bureau is using it for, by law. And that law has been tried and tested over time, right? Different branches of the federal government have tried to use census data to identify individuals, and they have lost. So legally, there's no way for any branch of the government to use household census data to make that determination. Now, there's talks about, again, the executive branch ordering the Census Bureau, the Department of Commerce, to cross-check records, right? So to use that and say, okay, well, we can't determine whether or not they're a citizen based on this form, but let's look at this person's name. Let's look at, where they live and see if there are any other documentation that says whether they're documented or not. Again, that is illegal, right? So by law. And then the last point is the president does not have that power, right? It's not held in executive branch. That is a congressional function, meaning only Congress can say how lines are redrawn during the redistricting process, or the apportionment process. So the executive branch can't say who is to be included in a district. That is a congressional act. So it is my firm belief that this is another scare tactic by this administration to deter vulnerable communities, fragile communities from participating in this very basic right in this country. I mean, even again, the law says that the legislation says every whole person is to be counted, right? It doesn't say every whole resident. It doesn't say every whole citizen. It says every whole person. So this is one of those acts, even if you are not documented, even if you can't vote, you can participate in the census. It is your right to be counted, to be seen, to be heard, and get the benefits to you, your family, and your community based on that data.
You can't just make changes to the Constitution.
Yeah.
You just...
Well, someone needs to tell the president that.
Right. Oh yeah. So this is Real Talk with Al. This is real, right? So I'm gonna ask you a real question. So let's say a mom with 2 kids live in Niger. The kid's father lives there. He does not supposed to live there. So she's afraid. She's afraid to be counted. Now, you mentioned the 72 years period, and I was trying to add up my age plus 72, and it scared me, so I stopped counting. So again, what would you say to those people?
Yeah. So, again, I think that the people who face challenges or see an obstacle around completing the census is usually based on a real fear, right? And you can't, unvalidate that fear. It is real to them, right? And it's most cases it's just real.
Right.
So it's about understanding what the obstacle is and then addressing it from then, right? So if, for instance, in that case, the fear is that man is not supposed to be in that household, and if NYCHA finds out, they could lose their apartment, right? So what I would say to them is, listen, I hear you. The good part about that is NYCHA can't find out who lives in there based on you filling out the census. NYCHA does not have access to this information. They will not know. The only people who will know is the Census Bureau, and they can't share that information with anyone. And then you follow up with the pros versus the cons, right? So it's like your information is protected, right? No one can find out. And the reason why you really need to fill it out is because those improvements we need for NYCHA that comes from HUD, the federal government, right? It's based on census data. It's based on how many people live here. That's how much money we get. Right. Or you talk about, again, that free lunch program down the block, right?
Right.
In that school, in that Title I school, that is census funding, right? So we need to make sure that we are taking care of our community in a very basic way by just being counted. It benefits us in our community. It benefits, the person that you're talking to. So you really sort of uplift the pros versus the cons, but you have to address the real fear, right? You have to talk about it. Listen, I get it. I understand. But they can't, but they won't find out. They won't find out by the Census Bureau, right? Like, this is not the way they can find out who lives in your apartment.
Yeah, so basically they're safe. Trust us, trust the Bureau, you are safe. Right. Well, I can talk with you, Melva, for another hour, but unfortunately we have to leave. But I want to thank you for spending this time with me, and I so appreciate it. Appreciate it. But I want to talk to those who are out there for a minute. If they're special enough to live with you, aren't they special enough to be counted? Just think about it. For more information about Link and its amazing online programs, go to linknyc.org and sign up to be part of it. Again, Melva, thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.